Welcome to the Unlist. After the last video, I decided to make one that's a little more calm, I guess, right? That last one was a bit doom and gloom, and I don't want to follow it up with another negative kind of video, but, you know, want to keep the ideas going. So I decided to just do a typical Unlist where I prattle off things in no particular order. This channel was named after those, but I honestly haven't done a proper Unlist in a very long time. In fact, I think I was still at my old job the last time I did one, so we're overdue. Thus, let us unlist my favorite citrus Chypres, my favorite aromatic citrus sheep fragrances, which, for those of you who don't know what those are, I have a video all about those way down in my catalog, where I go over the why-tos and wherefores of the sheep genre in general. The aromatic citrus sheep was a particular variety that was more or less pitched at men. I mean, women had some too, and there were many unisex varieties. But I'd say the bulk of the more iconic ones were male market releases. But everything from fragrances like Eau de Lancôme, Eau de Guerlain, Eau de Rochas, those are all aromatic citrus sheeps. And then you've got some that are more or less strictly pitched at women, like Charlie by Revlon, which has a lot of florals in it, so it's more of a floral citrus aromatic sheep. But a lot of them are male market releases. That was the kind of the point, I guess, for the citrus aromatic sheep. Since women had the aldehyde floral sheeps, they had the leather variety, and they also had some of the more classic, just traditional sheeps like Mitsoko and Sheep de Cody, and Youth Dew can slide into that category. Even though Youth Dew is a lot more ambery than the others, it still kind of fits in that classic sheep category. So with men got the aromatic citrus variety, and those dispensed with most of the florals. They were really more about the citruses. They did have some choice florals, white florals. Some of them had geranium or lavender. Some of them played with things like petitgrain, but they just were, by and large, it was the bergamot, the lemon was the focus. And then you'd have some kind of aromatic core, usually done with herbs, with geranium and lavender mixed together, similar to a fougere, but not quite. And then you would finish it off with a sheep base, which would be oak moss, labdanum, sandalwood perhaps, civet perhaps, or another musk choice. And then you could get some fancy chemicals in there too. You could get stuff like isobutylquinoline, aka pyrrolone, could find its way into. Couple of them also, the newer varieties, play around with some synthetic ambergris accords, which are built up with things like ambroxides or ambroxinous. The cool kids say. I'm not a cool kid. But that's generally the structure. They're not a very full, not a very round genre. They are very sharp, piercing, aromatic, usually fresh, and the aromatic citrus sheep sort of laid the groundwork for things like aquatics that came later, right? Men wanted a fresh, bracing scent. They weren't going to get it from a powdery, vanillic thing or a heavy, mossy, patchouli fougere thing. They weren't going to get it from those. If they wanted something fresh and sharp and bracing, outside of like a mint fragrance, right, they were turning to the citrus aromatic sheep, and that kind of became the groomed and clean smell for men, until things like aquatics, fresh fougères, and more abstract perfumes began to emerge in the late 70s, early 80s, and then, right? So, my favorites. I've spent 5 minutes introducing you. Now it's time to start naming some fragrances. Well, I think by and large, my most worn and some could argue most favorite aromatic citrus Chypres are going to be Mustache by Rochas, released in 1949, and Monsieur de Givenchy, released in 1959. So let me get you the ones I have that I've been wearing recently. Yeah, okay. So this is my almost gone bottle of Mustache, and I have 3 more of these, so don't worry. I will be buried with this like Tutankhamun. I am not going to run out. And this particular fragrance took me a while to understand it. Right when I first smelled this, and I wasn't well versed in vintages, I wasn't well versed in anything. I just bought it because at the time I was looking for the oldest thing I could find that was still available for sale. I was just trying to see what a really old perfume smells like. So this was my introduction to this fragrance, by the way. But I was like, yeah, I just want to see what the oldest one of these smells like. So I did a little digging on Base Notes. This was actually before I had a Base Notes account. I was just a lurker at the time, you know. And I found this, had a release date of 1949, and it was still plentiful. Bottles were very low priced at that time. I think it retailed for like maybe $20, $25. I'm going back like 15-ish years or so. So going back like late 2000s. And I bought it. And when I got it and I sprayed it for the first time, I was like, I did not know what to make of this. I was not a happy camper with this when I first smelled it. I was like, oh, is this thing spoiled? What's wrong with this? But, you know, me, I don't give up so easily. So I sprayed it a few more times, wore it a couple times. A couple of my friends would look at me and they're like, what the fuck are you wearing? Like, what is that? Like, you have to understand, nobody my age at that time. So in the late 2000s, I was in my late 20s. Nobody in my age group, you know, millennials, had any point of reference at all for something like this. Because our parents didn't wear this. Because they wouldn't have been old enough to wear this. Our grandparents probably wore this. But they were all mostly passed away or in the twilight years and not really concerned about cologne anymore when they're 70 and 80 years old. So there was not really anyone who could chime in and say, yeah, this is this, right? We wore this, blah, blah, no context. So me and my friends had a hard time understanding this. But then, like one day, like I said, I just kept wearing it. It's like an acquired taste, like when you drink beer for the first time. And then one day, I don't know what happened, but it just kind of clicked. I just got it. I understood it. And I think most of that comes down to, at the time, I switched from using Zest to Safeguard. And when I got a bar of Safeguard soap out of the wrapper and I washed my hands with it and I showered with the Safeguard soap, the smell of the Safeguard soap, and you've smelled Safeguard, you know what I'm talking about. Safeguard has this very sharp, very bracing, citrus, aromatic smell. Not altogether unlike this. Safeguard came out in the late 60s. This came out in the late 40s. There's a very high chance that whoever created the perfume for the Safeguard bar soap smelled this and went, let's do a take of that. So when I washed in the Safeguard soap, got out of the shower, came over and got my bottle of this and said, yep, yeah, Now, obviously, this has civet in it, and it has an animalic quality. The Safeguard soap has no animalic quality at all because it's Safeguard, right? It's not going to have animalics in it. So I'm talking mostly top notes and heart notes, right? But this is just basically like Safeguard with musk and a heavier, woodier base. This real sandalwood in this, real oak moss in this. This was back in the days where everything was real, right? So, I mean, it has chemicals in it too, of course. But yeah, and it's just got this punchy, sour, lemon lime citrus. It's got the geranium. It's got herbs. It's got a little bit of lavender too, but not enough to really pull it into a fougere structure. And it doesn't really play with tonka all that much. So it's mostly the sandalwood, the oak moss, the civet, the labdanum. And yeah, it's a very bracing, sharp, sour, musky, woody, and it's great after a shower. Even though it has civet in it, I would still say that this, once this dries down, it gives you that tart, old school kind of freshness. And freshness with just the right amount of must. A little bit of mustiness. Just that little bit of virile mustiness. So you're not 99.44% clean like a bar of ivory soap. You're more like 85% clean. You still got a little bit of schmutz on you. But it's a sexy schmutz, okay? It's a sexy schmutz you've got on you when you wear this. And it's made me a believer. And of course, I've destroyed this bottle in the process of coming round to it. Now, my next favorite is this guy right here. And I've done a whole video on this one, so I won't spend as much time talking on it. I mean, I did a whole video on the other favorites too, but... So this little guy right here. This is the Monsieur de Givenchy. Now, I have worn so much of this. So much of this. Not from this particular bottle, though. But I've worn so much of this. And I'm going to put it back in the box, but... This guy is just a revelation. A complete revelation. It has that perfect mid-century, late 50s, early 60s, groomed, clean, structured kind of smell. It is an evolution. Okay, it is an evolution of Mustache. Mustache, just a bit too funky. Okay, a bit too sour. It's great. I love it, the tartness of it, but it still has that schmutz that I mentioned. But if you just can't abide, you don't want the schmutz, right? You want a schmutz-free experience, then you go with the Monsieur de Givenchy. That's the one you want. Now, it does have a little bit of civet musk in it, okay? It is not animalic-free, but the civet is dosed so low and thus so judiciously and balanced so well that the focus is really the citruses, the lavender, the geranium, the sandalwood. The civet excuses itself from the party, and it sits in the background, and it just, maybe it DJs or something for a little while. It just puts on records, but it doesn't really doesn't mingle with the crowd. Whereas with Mustache, it's just out there, okay? So it is probably like, here's my big honking 200 ml bottle. This is a later bottle though, so it doesn't have the wraparound label. This is still a good bottle though. Don't make any mistake. If you can't get that really old bottle like I have, if you want to settle for a newer one, this one's really good. And Enchant Parfums has this in Canada. He'll sell these to you at a good price. It's really good. And like I said, man, just the understated classiness of this. This could almost be, if I was going to swear off all perfume and cologne, it would come down to a shootout between this one, Ungaro, and Black Suede. The three of those in a shootout, really. which one would become my lifelong signature and the rest would get thrown away. Be tough call to make. Now we've got the Chanel entry. I admit this one doesn't get as much wear as some of the other ones do. I used to wear this one a lot more. But then my love affair of Monsieur de Givenchy began. And my love affair of that fragrance really took me away from this one. But I need to come back to this one, though. This is really good. The difference between this, though, and Monsieur de Givenchy is very, very clear. That fragrance focuses more on the lavender, the geranium, the citrus, the sandalwood. Very sharp, very clean, right? Very soapy almost. This one goes for a more plush, woody effect. It uses cardamom very effectively. It has petitgrain. The other fragrances do not have petitgrain. It says petitgrain. This has just a woodier representation of the base. Okay, this is more along the lines of the cardamom, the cedar wood, the oak moss. Okay, the musk choices. This plays more with nitro musks. The other ones don't play with nitro musks. Okay, they play with civet. They play with sour, punchy. This one tries to be more just classier, woodier. This one is more like a fancy bar of soap, like a French milled sort of hotel soap kind of smell, right? This is more of the classic French Savant, but made masculine because of the choice of florals, the choice of spices and woods. So it's Chanel, right? Chanel does what Chanel does. Some may argue their fragrances are very overwrought and too smooth and too ironed out, right? That you want a wrinkle or two in your fragrances to make them exciting. And this has 0 wrinkles. This is like Monsieur de Givenchy is mashed potatoes with lumps still in it. This is like someone takes an electric mixer and beats all the lumps out of your potatoes and makes them just like pudding, like potato pudding. It's kind of what this is. But I mean, it's good though. It's good. It just focuses more on refinement. It doesn't get in there and just hit you like the other ones do. So maybe you want that. Maybe you want more of the velvet glove, the white glove approach. If you're more of that kind of guy, putting on the Ritz, this is for you. Of course, there are a couple of others. There are some honorable mentions that also make this list too that need to be discussed. Let me see, where is it? Right here. Yeah. A little later in the game, 1967, and we have Capucci Pour Homme by Roberto Capucci. This is an 80s bottle. The original 60s bottles were the triangle square with the cap that screwed off and it was a splash. These came out around the same time as Art de Capucci and they share the same bottle, so. So if you see Art de Capucci and then you see Capucci Pour Homme and it's in the same bottle, this is an 80s bottle of this fragrance. Now, Art de Capucci is the mossiest fragrance I've ever smelled. It too is a Chypres, but it's so mossy that I don't put it in the citrus aromatic category. It's a moss bomb, right? You talk about ambroxan bombs and tonka bombs. Well, Art de Capucci is an oak moss bomb. If such a thing exists, it is. This, on the other hand, This is kind of like, what's funny about this is I smell Arte Capucci, and even though it's a man's fragrance, I see the blueprints to Revlon Charlie in this scent. I smell this and I think someone took this and added in more florals, added in hyacinth, increased the lemon, made it a bit sweeter, a bit more floral, and popped out Charlie. But this one, marketed to men about 7 years earlier, 67 versus 74, this one is simpler. It's got a big dose of pyrrolone though, so if you don't like that isobutylquinoline pyrrolone smell, part of the Mustache accord in some forms, but if you don't like that anisic kind of vibe, you're probably not going to like this. But I like this. I love pyrrolone leather fragrances in general anyway. I love that particular note, so I'm a fan of it. I love English leather, for instance. I wear it all the time. So to me, that sour, tannery style note doesn't bother me. And it works well in this fragrance. But I would not call this leather. This is not a leather perfume. It just uses pyrrolone as part of the base. It is still oak moss. It is still patchouli. It is still bergamot. The bergamot in this is very, very, very livid. It's very angry bergamot. It screams at you. It is almost like, some folks may call it bug spray, but I don't care. I love it. It's juicy. It's fresh. So it's got everything I want a fragrance like this to have. And it can be a bit on the sheer side, so you think it's not strong and you over apply it, but be careful. It's just very sheer. It's a very sheer scent. I don't want to run the clock too long on this video, so I could name a lot more. Like I said, I could name Eau Sauvage, I could name Eau de Guerlain. There are a lot of those more floral type of citrus aromatic Chypres, but I'm staying away from those since they're kind of a subdivision of their own, really. I'm sticking with the classics, but the 80s crew has to come out before I wrap this up, and thus I will bring out a couple. Let's see, where is it? Where is my bottle of that? Sometimes I lose things. I don't know where they are. It's right in front of me. Right in front of me, I know it is. Ah, here it is. So, rumor has it that Giorgio Armani loved Monsieur de Givenchy and wanted his own version of it. And that was the creation of this Armani Eau pour Homme from 1984. So whether you believe that rumor or not, if you believe that this is just Giorgio Armani's take on Monsieur de Givenchy, I mean, it's plausible. But this is sort of the Italian style take of Monsieur de Givenchy. So you get more herbs. Okay, you get a little more aromatics in this. You don't get as much of the soapiness. You don't get as much of the sharp citruses. This is definitely lives more in the earth than it does in the citrus profile, but it is still very fresh. And it is still a beautiful perfume, but doesn't get nearly as much usage as my Givenchy does. Now, come along 2 more years, 1986, and Gianfranco Ferrer would get involved with the whole citrus aromatic Chypre thing, but he would do a big, heavy, woody version of it in this scent called Gianfranco Ferrer Man, also known as Four-Man or Homme, Man with 2 N's, or Uomo, depending on the country. It was named differently depending on the language, but it's known as Four-Man. So this is basically like an Armani Eau pour Homme, but with a big old slug of wood. Huge, huge, massive, massive slugs of cedar wood, sandalwood. This is very woody, and the citrus profile is a bit more Uranus in this as well. And the herbs are very chewy, and I don't use the word chewy often to describe a fragrance. I try to stay clear of that, but this is a very chewy, herbal, woody take. Very heavy, okay? Not Arte Capucci heavy. You still smell the bergamot. It still has that sour citrus top, but this is the one with muscles. Of all the citrus aromatic Chypres I've named so far, the Mustache, the Givenchy, the Chanel, okay, this is the one that hits the plates the hardest, hits the gym. This is the heavy one. This is the one that's going to beat up the bullies, protect you. If they're trying to take your lunch money, that's the one that's got your back. Now, the last one before I roll, call this a wrap, is Homme de Grey. This came out in the 90s, and many of us in the community find it bizarre that this would release in the 90s, because this is straight out of the 60s. This actually smells like it could be a flanker to Capucci pour Homme. Capucci pour Homme and Homme de Grey are kissing cousins. This was perfumed in 1996, I believe, by Gerard Anthony, who's the same guy who made Ungaro pour Homme in 78. He also made Balenciaga pour Homme in 1990. He would do 2 years after this, in 98, he would do Salvador Dali Leroy Soleil Homme, which is a good fragrance, a fougere fragrance. He also would perfume Paco Rabanne XS pour Homme in 94. So he had done a lot of modern things, a lot of fresh things, a lot of contemporary things, right? But this was like his trip back into the past, and he made this, and it's very anachronistic fragrance for the 90s. Like I said, it smells like it could have been 1965 instead of 1995, 96 or whatever. This could have been a flanker to the Capucci, as I mentioned. Big differences though. Once again, more herbs. This one introduces lavender. So the Capucci doesn't really have lavender in it at all. There's no lavender in the Capucci. This adds lavender. And because it has lavender and more herbs, this ends up having a smell that I sometimes compare to the scent of crisp new money, which some of you don't like that smell. Crisp dollar bills. Doesn't smell exactly like that, obviously, but I've always gotten a crisp dollar bill vibe from this on top of everything else, and that makes it interesting and all that stuff. But that's it. My favorite citrus aromatic Chypres fragrances. One more honorable mention. Yeah, this is probably the oldest one on the list. This one goes back to 1911. This is the oldest one. This one's called Chevalier d'Orsay. And the Chypres category as we know it didn't exactly exist at this time, so this kind of predates the Chypres a little bit. So you can call it a proto Chypres if you want, a proto citrus aromatic Chypres. But it has the same structure. It's got the bergamot, the oak moss, the labdanum, the sandalwood. It has the same star players. It just predates the genre a little bit, being so early on, being 1911. But the big thing about this, the thing that makes me drawn to this, is Artemisia. If you like Artemisia, Armoire, Wormwood, whatever you want to call it, this has a massive, massive slug of Artemisia in the heart of this fragrance. Marjolaine also plays a part too. It's very odd. Like I said, it does things a little different because it was so early. It was breaking rules that didn't exist yet. The rules didn't exist, so it couldn't break the rules that didn't exist. But really good. Parfums d'Orsay did a video on them too. Very strange house. They were like an American attempt at making a Guerlain. They were America's Guerlain, but then they ended up being French anyway because a French businesswoman bought them. When the American financiers couldn't make it work, they sold it back to the French. So it was an American house that became a French house that played off of French aristocracy and tried to have that Guerlain sort of vibe to it, but it never fully panned out the way that they wanted to. They had success. The house was around until the 70s before it went bankrupt. And after it went bankrupt, it got rebooted a couple of times. This bottle is from the 90s version of D'Orsay when they came back and relaunched a bunch of their old perfumes. But that's it, guys. That's my video. My favorites. Hope you enjoyed watching it. Catch you next.